Imagine a quiet suburban park where kids are just playing basketball until one boy's life changes forever. Witness a corrupt cop, a locked cage, and a father's relentless pursuit of justice. But what the officer doesn't know is that this father isn't just any man. He's an FBI agent with everything it takes to bring the truth to light. What happens when abuse of power meets unstoppable determination? Stay tuned for a story of courage, justice, and the dramatic downfall of a man who thought he was untouchable. The late afternoon sun stretched lazily across the small suburban park, casting long shadows over the cracked basketball court. Jordan Carter wiped the sweat from his forehead as he dribbled the ball, his sneakers squeaking against the asphalt. The laughter of his friends echoed in the air, a carefree melody that drowned out the distant hum of traffic. At 14, Jordan was tall for his age, with a wiry frame that hinted at his potential as an athlete. His father always joked that he had NBA height but FBI brains, a nod to the Carter family's proud lineage of discipline and sharp intellect. But for now, all that mattered was sinking the perfect shot. "Come on, Jordan," his friend Malik shouted, hands raised. "Bet you can't make it from half court." Jordan smirked, his competitive streak lighting up his hazel eyes. "Watch and learn." He stepped back, focused, and launched the ball into a perfect arc. The group exploded into cheers as it sailed cleanly through the net. Their celebration was cut short by the sound of screeching tires. A police cruiser pulled up abruptly at the edge of the park, its tires spitting gravel. The sight of the white and blue vehicle sent an uneasy ripple through the group. The officer behind the wheel, Hank Wallace, was well known around the neighborhood, and not for good reasons. Hank stepped out of the car, his presence immediately oppressive. At 6 feet 2 inches, with a broad, imposing build, he carried himself with the arrogance of someone who'd never been challenged. His uniform was meticulously pressed, but his demeanor oozed hostility. "What's going on here?" he barked, his hand resting on the baton strapped to his belt. His cold blue eyes swept over the boys, landing on Jordan. Jordan straightened, trying to mask the unease bubbling in his chest. "Just playing ball, sir," he said evenly. Hank's lip curled. "Playing ball? Looks more like you're loitering. Don't you kids have somewhere else to be?" Malik tried to step in, his voice steady but nervous. "We're not causing any trouble, officer. We're just—" "I wasn't talking to you," Hank snapped, silencing Malik with a glare. His attention turned back to Jordan. "And you? Got something smart to say?" Jordan held his ground. His father had always taught him to be respectful but firm. "No, sir. We're just here like we always are." Hank's eyes narrowed. "That's so? You think you're above the rules, huh? How about I take you in, teach you a little respect?" The words hung in the air, heavy with menace. The other boys shuffled nervously, exchanging glances, but Jordan didn't flinch. "We haven't done anything wrong," he said carefully, keeping his tone measured. "There's no need for that." Hank took a step closer, towering over him. "You don't get to tell me what's needed, kid. Hands behind your back." The command sent a chill through Jordan's friends. Malik stepped forward again, but Hank's glare stopped him in his tracks. "Unless you want to join him," Hank warned, his hand hovering near his baton. Jordan complied, his jaw tight, as Hank roughly cuffed his wrists. He didn't resist, not because he was afraid, but because he knew fighting back would only make things worse. As Hank led Jordan to the cruiser, the other boys watched in stunned silence. Malik tried to memorize the badge number on Hank's chest, his heart pounding. "We'll get you out, man," he called, his voice shaking. "Just hang tight." Jordan turned back briefly, giving his friends a faint nod before Hank shoved him into the back seat. The door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the park. In the driver's seat, Hank adjusted his rearview mirror, his eyes meeting Jordan's in the reflection. "You think you're tough, huh?" he sneered. "We'll see how tough you are in a few hours." Jordan didn't respond. He stared straight ahead, his mind racing. He didn't know where Hank was taking him, but he knew one thing for certain. His father would come looking. And when David Carter started looking, no one, not even Officer Hank Wallace, would be able to hide. The faint hum of the dishwasher and the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the Carter household. David Carter sat at the kitchen table, flipping through a stack of case files. His sharp brown eyes, weathered with years of experience, darted between documents and his laptop screen. Though he was officially off duty, David's mind rarely rested. As a senior FBI agent working undercover on a corruption case, every detail mattered. But tonight, something gnawed at the edges of his concentration. Jordan wasn't home yet. Glancing at the clock on the wall, 8:15 p.m., David frowned. Jordan was usually back from the park by now. He trusted his son, knowing he was responsible and level-headed. But something about the silence in the house felt wrong. "Jordan," he called out, his deep voice echoing down the hall. No response. David set the case file aside and picked up his phone. He dialed Jordan's number, tapping his fingers on the table as the line rang. No answer. A second attempt yielded the same result. A knot of worry tightened in David's chest. He pulled up a group chat he had with Jordan and his friend's parents, quickly typing. He asked if anyone had seen the boys. Within moments, messages began to flood in. Malik's mom. Malik just got home. He said there was some trouble at the park with a cop. Tasha's dad. Tasha said the officer took Jordan in his car. David's jaw clenched as his heart skipped a beat. He grabbed his keys, his FBI badge, and his phone. Trouble at the park? He muttered under his breath, heading to his car. What kind of trouble? The drive to the park was a blur, his mind racing with scenarios. Pulling into the empty lot, he scanned the area. The basketball court sat eerily still, the street lights casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. Malik's description played over in his head. A cop took Jordan in his car. David parked and got out, walking to the spot where the boys had been playing. A scuff mark on the ground and a lone basketball near the fence told part of the story, but not enough. His phone buzzed again. Malik, it was Officer Wallace. I saw his name tag. David froze. Hank Wallace. That name wasn't unfamiliar to him. As part of his undercover work, David had come across Wallace's record, a long trail of complaints, accusations of racial profiling, and abuses of power. But the man had always managed to dodge accountability, thanks to the precinct's corrupt captain shielding him. Damn it, David muttered, his worry intensifying. His phone buzzed again, another message from Malik. Malik, he told Jordan he was taking him to teach him a lesson. David didn't waste another second. He got back into his car and headed straight for the local precinct. His thoughts were sharp, analytical. He knew from experience that walking into a precinct unprepared could backfire. Still, he had no choice. His son's safety was on the line. When he arrived, the station was quiet save for the faint chatter of radios from inside. David stepped out, his tall frame cutting an imposing figure even in civilian clothes. He pushed open the heavy glass door and approached the front desk, where a young officer sat scrolling through his phone. "Can I help you?" the officer asked, barely looking up. "I'm looking for my son, Jordan Carter," David said, his voice calm but firm. "He was taken by Officer Wallace earlier this evening. I'd like to see him." The officer hesitated, clearly caught off guard. I'm not sure we've processed anyone by that name tonight. Let me check." David's sharp eyes followed every move the officer made. The man typed into his computer, frowning. "Nope, no Jordan Carter here." "Then where is Wallace?" David asked, his tone carrying the weight of someone used to getting answers. The officer squirmed. He's probably still out on patrol." David's patience wore thin. "I know Wallace brought my son here. Don't play games with me." As the tension escalated, another officer entered the room. This one, a petite man with a nervous energy, was Officer Tyler. He glanced at David, his face betraying a flicker of recognition. "You're David Carter?" Tyler said, stepping closer. His voice lowered, and his eyes darted toward the hallway. "I've seen you before. FBI, right?" David didn't confirm or deny it. "Where's my son?" Tyler hesitated, glancing at the officer at the desk. After a long pause, he said, "Wallace was here earlier. I think he brought someone in, but..." He trailed off, his discomfort evident. "But what?" David pressed. Tyler leaned in slightly, lowering his voice further. "He's got a reputation for doing things off the record. If your son's here, he won't be in the system." David's fists tightened. He stepped back, his mind working rapidly. "Is Wallace still here?" Tyler shook his head. "No, he left a while ago." But before Tyler could finish, the precinct door opened, and in walked Wallace himself. His smug expression faltered slightly when he saw David. The tension in the room was palpable. Well, Wallace drawled, recovering quickly. "Can I help you with something?" David's eyes locked on him, unwavering. "Where's my son?" Wallace tilted his head, feigning confusion. "Your son? Sorry, I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," David said, stepping closer. "You took my son from the park. I know you brought him here." Wallace smirked, leaning casually against the counter. "If I'd arrested anyone, they'd be in the system. Check the logs." "Oh wait, you already did." David's gut churned with anger, but he knew better than to let it show. He stepped back, his mind calculating his next move. "You're making a big mistake," he said quietly. You don't know who you're messing with. Wallace's smirk deepened. And neither do you. As David turned to leave, Tyler's voice stopped him. Mr. Carter, he said hurriedly, glancing nervously at Wallace. Check the basement. David didn't respond, but the cryptic hint was all he needed. His steps quickened as he exited the precinct, his heart pounding with both fear and determination. Wherever Jordan was, he wouldn't stop until he found him. And when he did, someone would pay. David sat in his car just outside the precinct, staring at the unlit building. Officer Tyler's words, "Check the basement," echoed in his mind. His instincts screamed that something was deeply wrong. Years in the FBI had trained him to read people, and Tyler's nervousness spoke volumes. He wasn't just afraid of Wallace. He was afraid of what David might find. David opened his glove compartment, retrieving a small flashlight and his badge. He glanced at the rearview mirror, his jaw tightening. Jordan, hold on, he thought. I'm coming. David re-entered the precinct, his steps steady but quiet. The lobby was empty save for the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Wallace and the desk officer were gone, leaving the station eerily silent. The stillness was unnerving, but David welcomed it. It meant fewer eyes watching his movements. He moved quickly toward the hallway Tyler had gestured toward earlier. The corridor stretched long and narrow, its walls lined with outdated bulletin boards and faded posters. At the end of the hall, a heavy metal door stood slightly ajar. Beyond it, a staircase led down into darkness. David's pulse quickened. He clicked on the flashlight and began his descent. The air grew cooler as David reached the bottom of the stairs. The faint scent of mildew lingered, mixed with something sharper, an acrid smell he couldn't place. His flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a grim scene. Cluttered shelves filled with old files, rusted equipment, and an unsettling assortment of cages along the far wall. David's chest tightened as he approached. The cages were grimy, their bars corroded with rust. Most were empty, but in the last one, slumped against the corner, was Jordan. Jordan. David's voice was low but urgent as he rushed to the cage. Jordan stirred, his face lighting up when he saw his father. Dad, he croaked, his voice hoarse. He scrambled to his feet, gripping the bars. I knew you'd find me. David scanned his son for injuries. There were no visible wounds, but the exhaustion and fear in Jordan's eyes told him everything. He reached through the bars, gripping Jordan's shoulder firmly. Are you okay? Jordan nodded, though his voice wavered. Yeah, just tired. He locked me in here and left. Said it was to teach me a lesson. David's jaw clenched as a wave of fury surged through him. He forced himself to stay calm for Jordan's sake. Don't worry, I'm getting you out. David inspected the lock on the cage. It was an old padlock, cheap but sturdy. He pulled a small multi-tool from his pocket and began working on it. His hands were steady, but his mind raced. Wallace had crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. Locking a child in a cage wasn't just cruel, it was criminal. And David would ensure he paid for it. Jordan, David said quietly as he worked. Did you hear or see anything while you were down here? Jordan hesitated, then nodded. I heard some officers talking earlier. They didn't know I was awake. They said something about hiding files, something big. I think Wallace is involved. David paused. This wasn't just about Jordan anymore. The basement wasn't just a dumping ground for old equipment. It was a place to hide secrets. And Wallace wasn't just an abusive cop. He was part of something much larger. The lock clicked open. David swung the cage door wide and pulled Jordan into a tight hug. You're safe now, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Let's get out of here. As they turned to leave, footsteps echoed from the top of the stairs. David's flashlight flicked off instantly, plunging them into darkness. He pressed a finger to his lips, signaling Jordan to stay quiet. A voice broke the silence. What are you doing down here, Carter? It was Wallace. David's pulse quickened, but he stayed calm. He stepped into the beam of Wallace's flashlight, shielding Jordan behind him. Retrieving my son, David said evenly. What the hell do you think you're doing, Wallace? Wallace smirked, his expression smug and unrepentant. Teaching the little punk some manners. You should thank me. David stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. You locked a child in a cage. That's not teaching, it's abuse. And it's illegal. Wallace's hand drifted toward his baton. You don't scare me, Carter. You're just some FBI suit who doesn't understand how things work around here. David's hand moved subtly to his hip, resting on the concealed holster beneath his jacket. His tone remained calm, but the warning in his words was unmistakable. Let me tell you how it works. You're going to step aside and let us leave. Then you're going to explain yourself to Internal Affairs. Wallace laughed, the sound cold and hollow. Internal Affairs? You think they care? They're in my pocket, just like everyone else. For a moment, the two men stood frozen, the tension between them crackling like electricity. Then, from behind Wallace, another voice cut through the air. Not everyone, Wallace. It was Officer Tyler. He stood at the top of the stairs, his hand resting on his sidearm. His expression was steel, his fear replaced by determination. Step away from them, Tyler ordered. Now, Wallace hesitated, clearly caught off guard. His eyes darted between Tyler and David before finally stepping back, his hands raised mockingly. Fine, have it your way. David didn't wait. He pulled Jordan close and moved toward the stairs, his eyes never leaving Wallace. Tyler nodded, stepping aside to let them pass. Once outside, David led Jordan to the car and made sure he was safely inside before turning back to Tyler. Why'd you help us? David asked, his tone softer now. Tyler hesitated. Because I've had enough of him. Enough of all of this. He's been doing things like this for years, and no one stopped him. But you can. David nodded, his respect for the young officer growing. You're right. And I will. As he drove away, Jordan leaned against the window, the tension slowly leaving his body. Dad, he said softly, what happens now? David's grip on the wheel tightened. Now, we make sure Wallace can't hurt anyone else ever again. And in his mind, he was already planning his next move. Wallace thought he was untouchable, but David knew better. Karma was coming, and David Carter would deliver it personally. The Carter household was unusually quiet the following morning. Jordan sat at the kitchen table, a plate of untouched pancakes in front of him. His mind replayed the previous night, the cold cage, the taunting voice of Wallace, and the unshakable fear he'd felt in that dark basement. Across the table, David studied his son. Jordan's silence spoke louder than any words. You don't have to go back to school today, David said gently. Take the day to rest. Jordan shook his head, his voice firm but soft. No, Dad. I need to go. I'm not going to let what he did mess with me. Pride swelled in David's chest, but he kept his expression neutral. That's my boy. Just know you're not alone in this. Jordan managed a small smile. I know. As Jordan ate, David's phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at the screen. Tyler. David picked it up, stepping into the hallway. What have you got? Tyler's voice was low and hurried. I went back to the basement this morning. Wallace must have panicked after last night, because he cleared out most of the files. But he missed one. David's heart quickened. What's in it? A lot. Falsified reports, hidden complaints, even some financial records that don't add up. He's been taking bribes from local gangs in exchange for looking the other way. David closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the gravity of the situation. Good work. Hold on to those files. I'll need them. Tyler hesitated. There's one more thing. Wallace is on to me. I think he suspects I helped you. David's voice hardened. Stay close to the precinct. Keep your head down. I'll handle the rest. Hanging up, David leaned against the wall, his mind already strategizing. Wallace wasn't just a rogue cop. He was a dangerous man with too much to lose. But now, David had something he didn't. Proof. David arrived at the local FBI field office just after noon. The sterile, gray-walled building buzzed with activity, agents moving purposefully through the halls. David's presence drew a few curious glances, but he ignored them, heading straight for Special Agent Sarah Monroe's office. Sarah, a seasoned investigator with sharp features and an even sharper mind, looked up from her desk as David entered. Carter, she said, motioning for him to sit. What brings you in? David dropped a flash drive onto her desk. Corruption at the local precinct. Wallace is the ringleader. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Wallace? I've heard whispers about him, but nothing solid. You have it now, David said, gesturing to the drive. Bribes, falsified reports, unlawful detentions. And last night, he locked my son in a dog cage. Sarah's eyes widened. Are you serious? David nodded, his voice cold. Dead serious. Sarah leaned back, her expression thoughtful. If we act on this, we'll need more than just what's on this drive. We need to catch him in the act. David's lips curved into a grim smile. I was hoping you'd say that. That evening, David met Tyler in a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. The young officer looked tired, his usual nervous energy replaced by grim determination. David slid a cup of coffee toward him. We're going to set a trap, David said without preamble. But I need your help. Tyler nodded, leaning in. What do you need me to do? David outlined the plan. Tyler would approach Wallace, pretending to be rattled and desperate. He'd hint that David was getting too close and offer to destroy the remaining evidence in exchange for Wallace's protection. The goal was to lure Wallace into making an incriminating move, something that would be recorded and used to bury him. It's risky, Tyler admitted, his voice low. If he suspects anything, he won't hesitate to take me out. David's expression softened. I know it's a lot to ask, but this is our best shot at taking him down. Tyler took a deep breath, then nodded. I'll do it. The following day, Tyler approached Wallace in the precinct locker room, where the older officer was changing out of his uniform. Tyler's hands trembled as he closed his locker, his voice deliberately shaky. Wallace, we need to talk. Wallace glanced at him, his expression wary. What about? Tyler glanced around, ensuring they were alone. Carter's been digging. He's got files, stuff that could take all of us down. If he gets any closer, we're screwed. Wallace stiffened, his eyes narrowing. What files? What are you talking about? Tyler swallowed hard. The ones in the basement. I can make them disappear, but I need your help. Wallace studied him for a long moment, his suspicion evident. Why would you do that? Tyler forced a nervous laugh. Because I don't want to go down with you. After a tense pause, Wallace smirked. Smart. All right, let's talk after my shift. Unbeknownst to Wallace, a hidden recording device in Tyler's pocket captured every word. That evening, Wallace drove to a remote location where Tyler claimed the remaining files were hidden. David and a team of FBI agents followed at a safe distance, their unmarked vehicles blending into the night. When Wallace arrived, Tyler was already there, standing near a burned-out building with a duffel bag at his feet. As Wallace stepped out of his car, Tyler held up the bag. It's all here, Tyler said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Wallace approached, his hand resting on his gun. Good. Now hand it over. Before Tyler could respond, David's voice rang out. Step away from the bag, Wallace. Wallace spun around, his face contorting with rage as David emerged from the shadows, flanked by FBI agents. You set me up, Wallace snarled. David held up a recording device. You set yourself up. Wallace reached for his gun, but before he could draw it, Tyler tackled him to the ground. The agents swarmed in, cuffing Wallace as he cursed and struggled. Back at the precinct, the evidence from the sting was presented to the captain. With no way to deny Wallace's guilt, the captain resigned in disgrace, and the precinct underwent a full investigation. Tyler, though shaken, earned the respect of his peers for his bravery. As for Wallace, he was charged with a litany of crimes, including child endangerment, corruption, and obstruction of justice. Stripped of his badge and facing decades in prison, he was finally held accountable for his actions. At home, Jordan listened as David recounted the operation. You got him, didn't you? Jordan asked, his voice a mix of relief and satisfaction. David nodded. We did. And he won't hurt anyone else again. Jordan smiled, a glimmer of his old confidence returning. Thanks, Dad. David pulled him into a hug, his voice filled with quiet determination. Always. The courtroom was hushed, the tension so thick it seemed to press down on everyone present. Rows of onlookers, police officers, journalists, and curious citizens filled the gallery, their eyes trained on the man in the defendant's seat, Hank Wallace. He sat with his shoulders slumped, a faint smirk tugging at his lips, as though he still believed he'd walk out of the building a free man. But David Carter, seated in the second row behind the prosecution, knew better. Jordan sat beside his father, his back straight and his eyes locked on Wallace. It was the first time he had seen the man since that harrowing night in the cage. Fear flickered briefly in his expression, but it was quickly replaced by resolve. David had insisted Jordan didn't have to be there, but Jordan had made his decision clear. I need to see this, he had said. I need to know he's not above the law. Now, as the trial unfolded, David couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. Jordan was stronger than he'd realized, stronger than Wallace could ever hope to be. The prosecution presented a meticulous case, built on the evidence David and Tyler had uncovered. The jury listened intently as the prosecutor laid out Wallace's crimes in damning detail. The bribes, the falsified reports, and most egregiously, the abuse of Jordan Carter. Jordan himself took the stand, his voice steady as he recounted the events of that night. He locked me in a cage, Jordan said, his words hanging in the air like a thunderclap. He said it was to teach me a lesson, but I didn't do anything wrong. David watched as the jury absorbed his son's testimony. Some of them looked horrified, others visibly angry. Wallace's smirk faded, his confidence clearly shaken. When it was the defense's turn, They attempted to paint Wallace as a dedicated officer under immense pressure who had made a mistake. The attorney emphasized the challenges of policing a difficult neighborhood, arguing that Wallace's actions, while inappropriate, weren't malicious. David's jaw tightened as he listened. A mistake, he thought, his anger simmering. Locking a child in a cage isn't a mistake, it's a crime. As the defense continued, David noticed something unusual. Wallace's confidence wasn't entirely gone. There was still a glimmer of arrogance in his eyes, as if he believed he had an ace up his sleeve. The courtroom was silent as the prosecutor stood for rebuttal. "Your Honor, the people would like to call a final witness to the stand, Officer Tyler." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Wallace's smirk vanished entirely as Tyler entered the room, dressed in his full uniform. He looked every bit the honest, brave officer he had proven himself to be, but there was a nervous edge to his step that only David seemed to notice. Taking the stand, Tyler provided a detailed account of his interactions with Wallace. He described the toxic culture at the precinct, the fear officers felt under Wallace's thumb, and most critically, the moment Wallace confessed to his crimes during their stage conversation. The prosecutor played the recording, the damning words echoing in the silent courtroom. "If he gets any closer, we're screwed. Destroy the evidence, and I'll protect you." The jury shifted in their seats, their expressions a mix of shock and disgust. Wallace's attorney scrambled to object, but the damage was done. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their decision. The judge's voice rang out, clear and final. "We the jury find the defendant guilty on all counts." A collective sigh of relief swept through the courtroom. Wallace's face contorted in rage as he stood to be handcuffed, shouting accusations at the prosecution, the judge, and even Tyler. But his words fell on deaf ears. He was escorted out of the courtroom, his once proud demeanor shattered. David placed a hand on Jordan's shoulder as they watched Wallace being led away. "It's over," he said quietly. "He won't hurt anyone else." Jordan nodded, his expression a mix of relief and exhaustion. "Thanks to you." In the weeks following the trial, the fallout from the case was immense. Several officers implicated in Wallace's schemes were suspended or dismissed. The precinct underwent a thorough overhaul, with new leadership focused on accountability and justice. Tyler, despite his initial fear, became a symbol of integrity within the department, earning the respect of his colleagues. For David, the victory was bittersweet. He knew the system wasn't perfect, that there were still battles to fight. But for now, he could take solace in the fact that one corrupt officer had been brought to justice. One evening, David and Jordan returned to the park where it all began. The basketball court was alive with the sound of sneakers squeaking and kids laughing. Jordan dribbled the ball, his movements fluid and confident. "You sure you don't want to play?" Jordan asked, spinning the ball on his finger. David chuckled. "I'll leave the half-court shots to you." Jordan grinned, launching the ball toward the hoop. It sailed through with a satisfying swish. He turned back to his father, his expression serious. "You really fought for me, Dad." David's smile softened. "Of course I did. That's what fathers do." Jordan nodded, his eyes shining with gratitude. "You didn't just fight for me. You fought for everyone he hurt, for everyone who didn't have someone to stand up for them." David placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "And one day, you'll do the same. Because you're stronger than you know." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the park in warm golden light, David watched his son join the other kids on the court. For the first time in weeks, Jordan looked free from fear, free from the shadow of Wallace. And David knew that justice, though often slow, had done its job. Months passed, and the Carter family began to settle into a sense of normalcy. The echoes of that fateful night, the fear, the anger, and the injustice, had faded into a memory. But it was one neither David nor Jordan would forget. It had changed them, strengthened their bond, and ignited a fire in both of them to ensure that no one else would have to endure the same ordeal. At school, Jordan became somewhat of a quiet leader among his peers. He wasn't loud or overly outspoken, but his experience gave him a wisdom that others gravitated toward. He joined the student council and proposed initiatives to address bullying and fairness within the school, gaining respect from classmates and teachers alike. One afternoon, as David picked him up from school, Jordan leaned over in the car. "Dad," he said hesitantly, "I've been thinking." David glanced at him. "What's on your mind?" Jordan hesitated, then said, "What happened to me? It wasn't just about me, was it? Wallace hurt a lot of people, and most of them probably didn't have someone like you to fight for them. I want to help kids like that." David's chest swelled with pride, but he kept his voice calm. "That's a big responsibility, son." Jordan nodded. "I know, but I think I'm ready." David smiled, reaching over to ruffle Jordan's hair. "You've got my full support, whatever you decide to do." Meanwhile, David's professional life took on a new focus. The Wallace case had uncovered a web of corruption that extended beyond just one precinct. With the trust of his superiors and the evidence he and Tyler had gathered, David spearheaded a task force aimed at rooting out misconduct in law enforcement. It was grueling, often thankless work, but David knew it was necessary. One evening, as David sifted through yet another case file at the dining table, Jordan approached him with a notebook in hand. "What you working on?" Jordan asked, pulling up a chair. David leaned back, rubbing his temples. "Another precinct, another mess to clean up. It's not glamorous, but it's important." Jordan opened his notebook and slid it across the table. "Maybe this can help." David raised an eyebrow and glanced at the page. It was filled with Jordan's notes, ideas for community programs, outreach efforts, and ways to build trust between law enforcement and young people. "You've been busy," David said, his voice tinged with admiration. Jordan shrugged. "Just trying to do my part." David chuckled. "You're going to make a great leader one day." One Saturday morning, David opened the front door to find Tyler standing on the porch. He was no longer the timid officer David had first encountered. There was a confidence in his posture now, a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. "Tyler," David said, stepping aside to let him in. "Good to see you." Tyler nodded. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for pushing me to do the right thing. It wasn't easy, but it changed my life." David poured them both a cup of coffee and sat across from him at the kitchen table. "You had the courage all along. I just gave you a little nudge." Tyler smiled. "Still, I owe you. And I wanted you to know, I'm leaving the precinct." David raised an eyebrow. "What's next?" "I'm joining the FBI," Tyler said, his smile growing wider. "They offered me a spot in the academy, and I accepted. I figured if I really want to make a difference, I need to be in a position to do it." David leaned back, his smile genuine. "You're going to be great at it. Just remember, integrity is everything." A year after the Wallace trial, the Carters stood in the same park where it all began. This time, it wasn't just Jordan and his friends playing basketball. A new mural had been painted on the park's wall, depicting children of all backgrounds playing together under the words strength and unity. The mural had been Jordan's idea, part of a community project he'd spearheaded. As they stood admiring it, Malik approached, basketball in hand. "Coming to play, Mr. Carter?" Malik asked with a grin. David laughed. "You kids are always trying to drag me into a game. Maybe it's time you showed them how it's done," Jordan teased. David shook his head, but relented, stepping onto the court. The game was lively, filled with laughter and camaraderie. For the first time in a long while, the park felt like a place of joy and freedom again. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, David looked at Jordan and saw the boy he'd fought so hard to protect. The boy who had become a young man with a fire in his heart and a determination to make the world better. "Dad," Jordan said, catching his breath after a shot, "do you think Wallace ever thought about what he did to people?" David paused, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe, but it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what we do with the lives we've been given." Jordan nodded, his gaze fixed on the mural. "Then let's make it count." And in that moment, David knew they already had.